Grade 9 in history, the top 6%, is not just about knowing everything. It's about writing smart, structured answers that hit all the marks. So in this video, we'll break down every question in Paper 1 Section B and show you how to shape your revision around them. When you actually do the paper, you will get something that looks like this. 4 questions, 44 marks in total, and 60 minutes advised to complete the paper. And if you're aiming for grade 9, you want something around 70%, which is at least 31 out of the 44 marks. Seems hard, but it will be feasible when we look deeper into it. The 4 questions could be split into 2 parts: the source types and the more essay types. The source ones, one 4 marker and one 12 marker, requires you to answer questions based on sources, while adding on your own knowledge or context. The essay type ones are where it gets more complicated. The 8 marker is just to describe an event, but the 16 marker hovers over multiple events and you need to make a judgment overall. And do remember, all of these has to be done in 60 minutes, which in this case, 1.5 minutes per mark will be feasible and equal to cover all 4 questions. Before we move on, we want to have a look at how our answers are marked. All questions in the paper are marked with level-based mark schemes, where each level describes a certain quality of response focused on qualities such as content, depth, or use of own knowledge. Your answer will be placed in the level that matches its overall quality, where a mark will be given within the level based on how strongly your answer meets the criteria of the level. In order to move to a higher level, you will need to meet all the criteria from the lower level and the additional demands for the higher level. So for getting the highest mark possible, first we have to confirm that the basic structures are done before we head up for more ambitious elements. The first question of the paper should give you a clearer idea of how this works, a 4 marker of how do you know type questions. The 2 levels are only split up based on if your analysis is developed or simple. By simple, what we have to do is to state what we see in the source. For example, we could just write, Source A was critical of the USSR due to his portrayal of Stalin as controlling and exploiting its satellite countries. In this line, we're directly referring to the question and giving our main point of what is portrayed in the source, which is a simple analysis. However, if we want to extend this to a developed analysis, we have to do more about it. For example, we could add this. The source showed Stalin forcing a weak, tired person to work. This was referring to the establishment of Commonform, where Stalin was just trying to get more control on both the resources and the political landscape of his satellite countries, but not helping them to recover from the war. All he did was to describe what is happening in the source and provide some own knowledge to support it. In this way, we will bring ourselves up to the developed category. And all we have to do is to repeat this for 1 extra point and it will be done. Now for the second question of the paper is a 12 marker utility type question, one that I believe is the hardest to answer. What you are asked to do here is to explain how the source is useful to understand a certain event. So on top of what we did from the 4 marker, where we just placed the topic sentence referring to the source, then explaining it with our own knowledge, we do one more step, which is to explain its utility, where its sentence should explicitly start with "this is useful because." What you want to do is to describe how the evidence you identified links to the event. It could be a certain time period of the event, one perspective of the event, or just the overview. We could, for example, be saying that this is useful because it shows us the USSR's actions were as a result of the Truman Doctrine. As Stalin could not afford to lose his satellite states for the USSR's buffer zone, he is forced to respond to the Truman Doctrine so that propaganda could be spread within the Eastern Bloc to secure the status of the countries. What we did here is to give a reason why the source is useful and just some further explanation. In this particular question, we want to do 2 points for each source, preferably 1 point on provenance and 1 point on content, as the highest level has asked for both. Content is what we looked at the actual source, and provenance is the background of the source, provided usually on top of the source with 1 line only. We just make 2 points, give evidence from it, explain its utility with your own knowledge, then you can move on. Repeat this on the other source, then the conclusion. The conclusion is where it gets a bit more complicated. We want to explain the combined utility of the sources, with reference to both of them. For example, you might want to write, both sources are useful for understanding the strong opposition and aggressiveness exerted from the East and the West after the Truman Doctrine. Then you refer to individual sources for evidence and a short explanation. We have 18 minutes for this question, so try to spend around 7 to 8 minutes on individual sources and 3 minutes for the conclusion. Afterwards, third question, 8 mark account question. This will usually be on a particular event or just within a time period. How this will be marked is first based on the order, then on the details and accuracy. Anything over level 2 needs a structured order of the event, and anything over level 3 requires you to link to the question. What you want to do is to write 1 sentence on the main point, especially if it is over a time period. You want to make it clear which part of the event you are writing. So for example, tensions began to ease in the 1960s during the Prague Spring, which you can then start to explain about it. We don't have time for every detail, so around 2 to 3 lines of accurate description should be enough. Afterwards, you go on to link your event back to the question, which is usually about tensions. So you should start with, this shows an ease or escalation in tensions because, which you then can go on and stating the impacts of the event, also finishing it with 2 lines. You have 12 minutes for this question, so you want to split the event into 3 parts, giving you 4 minutes per paragraph, which should be enough considering 4 to 5 lines for a paragraph should be done. Before we move on, this channel has a goal to carry your GCSEs to grade 9 in the most efficient way, so don't forget to subscribe to us. And finally, the big fat 16 marker. How far do you agree type judgment question? It will provide you with a statement saying that one particular event is the main reason for increasing or decreasing tensions during a particular time, possibly in a specific area. 3 things to focus on the statement. You have to write about a stated event or you will be capped at level 2. For level 3 or above, you want to link your answer back to the tension part. So it is important for you to think if what you are writing allows you to argue for increasing or decreasing tensions. And for level 4, you will need to show the link between the events you have made and make judgment of the most important factor convincing. Just saying, any events written out of the time period or area will be ignored, which will very likely cap you at low level 3 boundaries. So how should we answer this? Start with a quick introduction. You state if you agree with the statement that the stated factor is the most important. Then you introduce what extra events you're going to write, no matter what your argument is going to be. Then you start with the stated factor first with an overview on how it changes tensions. For example, you could write, the Prague Spring was still important for increased tensions as it showed the strong stance of USSR of maintaining the buffer zone despite the fear of MAD. Afterwards, you summarize the event in 2 lines. Don't include every part of the event, but parts which cause a change in tensions. Then, you explain how it led to increase or decrease in tensions, with a sentence starting with this led to increase or decreased tensions because. Finally, you end this by comparing this factor with other factors. If you think this is the most important, argue why it is more important than other factors. If you think other factors are more important, argue why this is less important. For example, you could write, however, this is less important than the CMC as the Prague Spring didn't involve any physical intervention and threatening from the US, showing how tensions had barely increased during the Prague Spring, which sums up this paragraph. You then move on to the second paragraph. It is basically the same structure, except if your first point isn't your most important reason, you should write it in your second point. Then you move on to the third paragraph and repeat everything. And finally, the conclusion. In the conclusion, you basically reinforce your statement by directly comparing the 3 factors you have explained. For example, in conclusion, the Berlin Wall crisis was the most important as it directly caused the aggression shown in the CMC, while being more mobilized and intense compared to the Prague Spring as it directly involved both superpowers. Therefore, I disagree with the statement. Here, I gave a direct explanation and comparison on the 2 less important events on my main one, which is enough for judgment, considering you have barely any time for this. For time management, you want to spend 6 to 7 minutes on each event, and 4 minutes total on intro and conclusion. So question structures explained. How do we organize our revision notes? I think it is very obvious. From the structure requirements, we can see that we don't need a whole page of explanations for each event. Even the most focused question of writing an account only requires you about 5 to 6 lines of content for the event. So therefore, your notes should be split into 4 columns. 1 for the name of the event, 2nd for the year of the event, to familiarize yourself with the time so you don't accidentally write irrelevant factors in the 16 marker. Thirdly, for the content of the event, and the final column for how it causes a change in tensions. Try to restrain the content and impact to around 3 to 4 bullet points each, which will make it doable for you to memorize and understand it before the exams. And if you really need it, there are 3 revision notes on the Cold War from me in the description, which you are very welcome to use for the exams. So that's it for this video. In the future, I'll be going through the Cold War curriculum. So make sure you subscribe to us and I will see you on the next one.